me start off by, first of all, welcoming British artist Mark Neville, who works at the intersection of art and documentary, investigating the social function of photography. He makes lens-based works which have been realized and disseminated in a large array of contexts, as both still and moving image pieces, slideshows, films, giveaway books, and his work has consistently looked to subvert the traditional role of social documentary practice. He often works with closely knit communities in a collaborative process intending to be of direct practical benefit to the subject. And his photographic projects to date have frequently made the towns he portrays the primary audience for the work. His latest book, Parade, is a multi-layered portrait of the farming community in Brittany in France, and it was nominated for the Deutsche Börse Photographic Foundation Prize this year in 2020. And he's currently working on a new book project about Ukraine, which will be published later this year by Stidel, called Stop Tanks with Books, and it will employ his activist strategy of a targeted book dissemination and try to make a direct impact upon the war in Ukraine. Mark is in Ukraine, in Kiev at the moment, so we can ask him about that. And in conversation with Mark will be our very own Carey Young. You will all, I think, know Carey, but if you don't, she is a London-based artist whose work across video, photography, performance and installation examines and questions the reach of the legal and commercial spheres and their ability to shape our contemporary reality. Recently, she's developed films and photographic series within courthouses in order to tell stories about law, identity, gender, and power. She's an associate professor in fine art at the Slade School of Fine Art. She has an academic specialism in photography. She's currently Wolfson Creative Arts Fellow, Honorary Research Fellow in the School of Law at Birkbeck, and has a Smithsonian Artist Research Fellow through 2021. So I'm going to hand over to Carey now, but just before I do, just reminding everyone, if you could put yourselves on mute, that would be brilliant for our recording. So Carey, over to you.
Thank you so much, Tim, for that wonderful introduction. And it's such a pleasure to be with Mark. We're sitting here grinning at each other, actually, because we're friends as well as colleagues. And we've known each other since 2007, I think. And Mark, it's such a pleasure to delve into your work in depth and to be able to ask you questions in some depth, hopefully. And what a moment also to be thinking about your work with this turn in the art world towards activism and a more political mode, and especially with the kind of problems in the world that you're engaging with so directly. So what we decided to do in the planning of this was that you would speak about some of your projects and show us images, and then we'll have some questions from myself and then over to the audience, which the audience can put in the chat. Or raise their hands later on. So would you like to kick off?
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Carey. And as you say, it's great to see one another virtually like this. And also thank you to Louisa for making this happen. I'm really delighted and honoured to be here and really looking forward to it. So I'm going to whiz through about 30 minutes, 30 years of work in 30 minutes, something like that. So forgive me if it's like a machine gun rattle, and then we'll get to the good stuff, which I think is the questions and hopefully some interesting answers. So I'm going to take over the screen now. Forgive me if I'm doing this slowly. So I will share this now. And I'm just going to check that everyone can see that okay. Does that look okay, Carey?
Yes, it does to me, yeah.
Super, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to begin with my first major photographic project. Before this, I was making films, installations, sculptures, even some painting. I have to say as well, my voice has been going for about 2 weeks now. So if I suddenly go to Larry the Lamb, don't be too put off, okay? I will muddle on through and it'll be fine. So this is called the Port Glasgow Book Project, and it's from 2003. And I entered a competition to do a public art project on the west coast of Scotland. And at the time, my art career was nowhere. I wasn't being exhibited. I didn't have a gallery. I wasn't really connected with the art world. I'd kind of given up. But I entered this competition, and it was to do some kind of public sculpture on the west coast of Scotland, anywhere on the west coast of Scotland, with a budget of around £100,000. So I applied, and my idea was to make a photo book in a kind of Magnum style, so hardback, glossy book of social documentary pictures. But the difference was my book would only end up in the homes of people in Port Glasgow. So Port Glasgow is a small shipbuilding town, former shipbuilding town on the west coast, with about 8,000 homes in it. And with this really strong tradition of shipbuilding, and Stanley Spencer made some paintings there. And it was used to be the world centre for shipbuilding in the 1950s. And with the decline of British steel and the steel industry, of course, now it's on its knees. And there's only one shipbuilding yard left, which is this one, Ferguson's. So my idea was to subvert the way in which these kind of Magnum photo books always end up on the coffee tables of English white middle-class people, a little bit like me, and not on the coffee tables of the people represented in the books themselves. So there seemed to me to be something hierarchically wrong in that relationship between the subject matter and the audience. So I thought, right, I'm going to make a book. Everyone in Port Glasgow, all 8,000 homes, are going to get a free copy of the book, but it's not going to be commercially available. So I tried, there we go, Larry the Lamb comes in. And so I tried to also make the content of the book subversive as well in some sense. So I asked a fashion designer friend of mine to make these hats, which are kind of like flapper hats, but also futuristic in a sense. And the idea was that someone looking at my book in 50 years' time would go, oh, look at the hats that people used to wear in Port Glasgow in 2003. And the whole thing would be a lie, you know, be bullshit. So everything about the book was trying to question the conventions of Magnum photo books, basically. Some shots are more like fashion shots, like these. Others are more kind of responsive on the street shots. This is taken in the ancient order of the Hibernian Social Club in Port Glasgow. So there's a very strong Catholic community and a very strong Protestant community in Port Glasgow. These are kids from Bernardo's, I think, homeless. Some of the pictures are based on paintings. I tried to emulate the lighting from this Joseph Wright of Derby photograph in this picture of a wedding at the town hall, St Francis Social Club, Bonnie Baby competition. The best known images in the book are these, which are taken in Port Glasgow Town Hall. And I spent about a week prior to these pictures setting up big flashlights, monoblocks they're called, in the rigging. You can see them there. One's got an umbrella behind it. About 6 of these. I'd go up this rigging and ladders, very high ceiling, install these big flashlights, come down, take a light reading, and then I knew after 2 or 3 days of installation that when I took a picture, the flash on my camera would set off all these other flashes in the rigging, and I'd get this beautiful spread of light. The only thing is that I didn't bargain on was that it was 2003. People had these disposable plastic cameras that you could buy then with a flash on them. So they'd go in to take a picture of their mates, and the flash on their camera would set off all the others, and bam, 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 bam. And they go, oh my God, that's such a great camera. It only cost me like 10 quid from Boots. Incredible flash on it. So I had to go around apologising to all these other people whose own pictures, party pictures, were horribly overexposed because of my primitive flash installation. Another thing that I tried to do in terms of subverting the way in which coffee table books operate is I tried to deliver them in a unique way. So not only was my audience different, you know, you couldn't go into Waterstones or a bookshop and buy my book. It was only going out to 8,000 homes, each of the homes in Port Glasgow. I also thought about the way in which I delivered the book. So originally we'd budgeted about £14,000 for the delivery of these 8,000 books. And after a while, I thought it's much better if that money goes back into the community and not to Royal Mail, who we'd originally got the quote from. So I talked to the boss of the local boys football team, Port Glasgow boys football team, which has about 100 different kids of different ages in it, and said, listen, can you deliver the books to all 8,000 homes in Port Glasgow? If you can do that, I can give you 14 grand, you know, and you can use it to spend on holidays abroad, football kit, whatever it is you like. And they were like, yeah, no problem. So I had to go through lots of tussles with Inverclyde Council, who were holding the purse strings at the time, and say, listen, it's much better this way. It's much less likely that a group of local kids are going to get attacked delivering to their uncles and aunties and friends than it is a group of outdoor posties. So after lots of health and safety considerations, they finally acquiesced, and we got the kids to deliver the books. And it was amazing. And to this day, it's one of the best days of my life. I can still remember it so vividly. All these kids chapping on doors and handing over these copies of the book, you know, swarms of these kids on the council estates. And just people's reactions, you know, like, what's this? What do you want from me? You know, do you want money for this book? And trying to explain to people it's like a gift, you know. No, I don't want anything back. It's a symbolic gift from me to the town, you know. So this is the day that the books were delivered. Here I am looking like a paedophile. And then as soon as the books were delivered, I kind of thought in my naive way, that's the end of it, you know. The project is over. But in a way, that's when the start of the project really began, in a sense, because I started to get all these emails from people. I put my email address in the book and responding to the book in some sense. So this one, I think it was the very first email I received from a Port Glasgow resident saying, not sure what you're trying to gain from this or what the reason behind it is, but I wish you luck in achieving it. And that was typical in some ways of the response I got. I also had the Greenock Telegraph, the local newspaper, who were commenting a lot about the project. Every day they'd have a new article. Are you for the book? Are you against it? This is Betty, who's on the front cover here, who loves it. I can't get over how good the photos are, she says. This woman here, Claire, thinks I'm exploiting people through the project. This is the manager of the boys football club, who can't completely bring himself to be entirely positive about the project, even though they've received £14,000 for it. But the most extreme reaction I had was all the residents in Port Glasgow, in one particular street in Port Glasgow called Robert Street. All the Protestant residents there got together, had a meeting, a street meeting, and they took their copies of the book and dumped them at the back of the Catholic club because they thought there were too many pictures taken in Catholic pubs and clubs and churches in the project, and not enough pictures taken in Protestant pubs and clubs and churches in the book. And then they set fire to them at the back of this club. So I got a call from the fire brigade saying, your books are on fire, Mr. Neville. So I was very upset at the time. I wanted everyone to love me and to love the work. But now I see it as an interesting gauge of sectarianism and also how an art project can reveal tensions, you know. So later, this project was shown at Modern Art Oxford, kind of reformed as a show. But one of the strange things is that the books became very valuable, and people in Port Glasgow could sell them, you know, for as much as like $600. So, and then, you know, obviously the people who burnt their copies were even more upset. They were like, God, first he insults us and now he tricks us by making the books valuable. But I was really delighted that the book would have some monetary value to those people who aren't interested in photography or art. And why should they be interested in photography or art, by the way? So I'm going to talk now very quickly about Hellman. This is fast forwarding from 2003 to 2010, 2011, so 10 years ago now. I got a call from the Imperial War Museum in London saying, you've been nominated to possibly be an official war artist. We're calling 5 people to interview. And I'd never been to a war zone before. I was never really interested in going to a war zone. I'm not really, I don't know why, I just never had. And then I started to think about my own family history, and my own grandfather was in the war, was on a ship for 4 years during the war, and he came back with severe PTSD, and he used to shout at everyone in the family. I remember him shouting distinctly, and take our photograph, you know, and kind of the kind of duality of him shouting at everyone and also taking our pictures had a really big effect on me as a small boy. And I remember thinking and feeling a lot about this guy and thinking, no, I want to go. So I went for interview. I think they interviewed 5 people, and to my amazement, they picked me to be the war artist. So at the age of 44, suddenly 45, suddenly I was having to prepare to go to Helmand a month later to be hosted by 16 Air Assault Brigade, the paratroopers, the biggest brigade in the British Army. And this is a kit I took with me. So I was uniquely responsible for getting this kit on and off helicopters for 3 months, basically. So a mammoth logistical and physical task. I mean, we've got high-speed film cameras, plate cameras, digital cameras, batteries, leads, cables, chargers, film stock, gas mask. I'm whizzing through these. So I made films and photographs. One of the most shocking things was how young people were. So not just the local population, but also the soldiers. You know, I mean, look at these guys. They look like 14 or 15 to me. You're meant to be 18 to serve on the front line, but I'm sorry. It's just wrong. People this young should not be there. I guess the other really upsetting thing about Helmand, Afghanistan was how young people are there, as I said, but also the going on patrol. So I was flown all over Helmand, Afghanistan during 3 months, and everywhere I arrived, I'd be introduced as the official war artist, and the captain there or whoever would say, right, we're going to show you the real Helmand, and they'd take me out on patrol. And patrols are physically very punishing and also psychologically extremely frightening. So there's someone at the head of the patrol with a metal detector, and the Taliban were using a lot of improvised explosive devices during that period, and mines effectively. And British soldiers were losing their legs and arms and getting blinded on a daily basis. And I would hear explosions on a daily basis and screams on a daily basis too. And out on patrol, there's maybe 6 soldiers in front of me and 6 behind me. I have to walk in a straight line behind the guy with the metal detector. So possibilities to take pictures are very limited, you know, because you can't really step left or right, because then you might step on a mine and you not only endanger your own life, but you endanger the life of the guy, the soldier behind you or in front of you, who's probably about 25, not 45 like I was. And so I was using a plate camera, a big flash unit, which I was carrying on top of my big, heavy body armor. And if I saw something I wanted to photograph, quickly turn, set my camera, put my plate in, click, flash, and then carry on walking before the soldier behind me caught up with me. Keep on moving. So I'm whizzing through this. Basically, I came back with PTSD. It took me about 6 months to admit I had a problem with it, and then I got treated quite heavily for it with therapy and sertraline, which is a drug that they use with American forces quite a lot. And yeah, it took me a while to recover, but it was, you know, basically I came back. I was in a 10-year relationship which came to an end as a result of my erratic behavior when I returned. I was having nightmares. I started self-medicating. And so I really wanted something good to come out of this whole experience. You know, I hope the work was one good thing that came out of it. And the other good thing was the friends that you make. You know, when you're being shot at, you really bond in a very intense way with the people around you. And this is Mike, who became very good friends of mine, very good friends. He left the army and would often visit me in my studio in East London over the past 8 years. He committed suicide last year, almost exactly a year ago. And almost everyone I know I've stayed in touch with have have had real problems adjusting to civilian life, because it's just not possible to do in any seamless or frictionless sense. You can't do it. Most of the people I know who were with me in Helmand, Afghanistan are still, still experiencing real problems adjusting to civilian life. So what I wanted to make a book about it. I wanted to have some kind of positive impact on mental health issues in the British military, basically. So I went to the Ministry of Defence, I went to Whitehall, and I said, listen, I want to make this book. It's not a criticism of the Ministry of Defence in any way. You can even write a chapter in the book celebrating your own achievements in this field. The only thing I'm interested in doing is encouraging troops who are still suffering from PTSD to come forward and get help, to get treatment. Because if I found it difficult to come forward and ask for treatment, imagine how difficult it must be for someone who's been told since they were 16 to man up their whole life, okay? So it's not going to happen unless someone really feels safe about doing that and encouraged to do so. So my idea was to make this book, battle against the stigma of military mental health, and to get it to people, to veterans who had never really sought treatment for any kind of trauma, who had either carried on or fallen through the cracks of society, because you end up self-medicating, and then you lose your job, you lose your family, and you end up homeless, or you end up in prison. And that's a very, 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 very common thing to happen, I'm afraid to say. So I went to the Ministry of Defence with a great idea for a book. We're going to get it out there to troops and veterans, blah, 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 blah. It's going to include my pictures taken from Helmand, Afghanistan, together with accounts of my own journey with PTSD, because I don't want to pretend that I'm above this, but also, more importantly, the accounts from troops who used to believe that PTSD was bullshit, but now they know it's real because they've suffered from it, or their comrades and colleagues have suffered from it. So first the Ministry of Defence were, sorry, Larry the Lamb again. First the Ministry of Defence were like, we think it's a great idea. And then they said, actually, no, we don't want you to reproduce. In fact, we forbid you to reproduce your images taken in Helmand, Afghanistan, together with these testimonies from troops suffering from PTSD, because it would imply that everyone you took a picture of in Helmand, Afghanistan is suffering from PTSD. And I said, well, no, I won't structure it like that. I'll make it very clear. It's two separate segments. Blah, blah, blah. And they said, no, we won't allow you to reproduce the pictures and the text in the same book. And I said, okay, Ministry of Defence, okay, Whitehall, I promise you, I will not reproduce them in the same book. So this was my fuck you to the Ministry of Defence. I produced one book, one slipcase, 2 volumes. And it was printed in Spain at a place called Grafos, who had been doing slipcase books, art books, for about 80 years. And they sent it over to Britain from Barcelona in 2 consignments in May 2015. The first consignment got seized. The first consignment of 500 copies got seized by UK Border Force. This is May 2015, and I have not received it since. And I've written to them, I've been on television, I've been in national newspapers, I've talked to them. They will not release it. They will not give a reason why. And UK Border Force, go figure, has strong connections to the Ministry of Defence. So clearly they wanted to block this publication. However, the second consignment of 1,000 copies came from Barcelona to my studio and arrived via a different route. So it arrived on pallets, and I was like, oh my God, I've got to get this out there before it gets seized, or I get a knock on the door from UK Border Force. So I spent all summer 2015, excuse me, furiously trying to get this book out to homeless charities, to mental health charities, to prisons. I did tours of prisons and prison libraries, doing talks and giving free copies of the book, all the places that I imagined that if you were a veteran suffering from PTSD and you hadn't been treated, you end up. And then I also reproduced my own story of my own journey with PTSD, which is also in the book. I reproduced it in the Independent on Sunday, both in the hard copy and online. And I put at the end of the piece, listen, if you're the relation of someone suffering from PTSD, a veteran, or you are a veteran suffering from PTSD and you read this, just email me at info@markneville.com and I will send you a free copy of the book. And as soon as that went online, on the Independent Online, May 2015, I got an email every 10 minutes for 3 months from a different veteran saying, please give me a copy of the book. Not just saying, give me a copy of the book, but going into incredible detail about what happened to them in Kosovo, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, going into real detail about it, operational detail, but also detail about what happened when they came back, the lack of support, the inability to adjust to civilian life. And time again, they would say to me in their emails, I recognized a version of myself in you. And that's how I know this is the most effective, impactful project I've done, because of that engagement. So this is one of the first very personal, moving emails that I received. I'm going to move on because it's a quick talk. So having had my book in 2015 effectively banned by my own country, out of the blue, I suddenly get an email from Kiev, Ukraine, Kiev Military Hospital saying, we heard about your book, we're fascinated by it. At the moment, we have all these troops, veterans coming wounded and psychologically damaged from the front line in eastern Ukraine. And they're arriving in Kiev Military Hospital, and we don't know how to treat PTSD. We'd love a copy of your book. And I was so knocked out that this former post-Soviet country was so forward-thinking about mental health issues in the military, whereas my own country had been so narrow-minded in its approach, that I immediately said, well, of course, you know, I don't have a Ukrainian language version of the book, funnily enough, but I'm going to get it translated into Ukrainian and send you a PDF of it. And I sent it to them, and they were so grateful and happy, and the communication so good. I thought, well, I'm going to go out there. So at my own steam, at my own expense, I went out to Kiev and just met some of the people at the military hospital there. And I started to fall in love with Ukraine, and I recognized the trauma in people's eyes, and I responded to it because I'd been through it myself. And that began a kind of 5-year relationship with Ukraine, which is going to result in this book, which is going to print this year at Steidl in Germany, called Stop Tanks with Books. And the aim is to do that, is to try and stop the war in eastern Ukraine. It's been going on for 6 years now, 6 years, almost every day, more or less. Someone has been killed or shot or shelled, or several people have been killed on the front line in eastern Ukraine. Something like 2 million people have had to leave their homes in eastern Ukraine, displaced to other parts. There's no support for them. Awful, absolutely awful. So the book is being sent out to policymakers, to MPs internationally, to international press and media, to people involved in the Minsk peace agreements, to people in Russian and Ukrainian parliament. And the idea is to galvanize things so much that the media and the world starts talking about this war again, and pressure is put on everyone to get it ended. There's no reason for it to continue. It's not really serving anyone's purpose as far as anyone can see. It's just endless misery. So it's time for it to stop. So this book aims to do that, and it's a call to action. It involves text, it involves sociological data and research. It includes pictures I'm going to whiz through now that I've taken over 5 years, all over Ukraine, not just in the war zone. You know, I've taken pictures in Chernobyl, where I caught COVID-19 this year in March. This is for the New York Times. I've taken pictures in the Kiev Lavra church here. I've taken pictures there in Odessa, a wonderful seaside resort that my co-host today, Carey Young, has relations from Odessa. So this is I guess you'd call this my current project, but in many people's eyes, my most current project is one that exhibited at the Photographers Gallery, and which is, I'm delighted to say, also on display now at Wolfson College for the next year or two, possibly 3. And it's a project I also started at the same time as I started the Ukraine work in 2015, I guess, 16. And I started it, funnily enough, the day we decided to leave the European Union. So I think that was, June 2016. And it was the very day that I opened an exhibition of my photographs, together with two other British photographers called Chris Killip and Tom Wood, at a place called Gwynsigal Arts Centre in Brittany. And they'd curated this exhibition, British subjects. I was delighted to be in a show with Tom and Chris. But I was the only one who could make it over to the opening. And I was at the opening, and 5 hours prior to our launch, where I would have to stand up in front of the exhibition and speak to the whole 200 people from the town and the mayor, Britain had voted to leave the European Union. So I was not only shocked, I was ashamed to stand up there and speak to this French audience. And so the first thing I said was, "J'ai honte, I'm ashamed," and I was. And so I decided that day with the curator of Gwynsigal Arts Centre, Jerome Southard, to start a project which reflected my disgust with Britain's decision. And I wanted to make a kind of mirroring of British life, in a sense, and explore this whole idea of community that I'm fascinated by throughout my work, and find out what community meant for people in Brittany. But use it as a kind of mirroring of Britain too. I mean, Brittany is derived from the term Little Britain, and its roots go back to the 3rd century, I think. British people moving to Brittany in France, as is now, And the one thing that struck me most was this kind of magical relationship they have there between people and animals. So even if the end product is still animals as food, Larry the Lamb again, appropriately enough, still, if the end product is still animals as food, what I've found again and again was farmers really making sure that the journey for those animals is as pleasant and pleasurable as possible. And there are all these different models for that kind of behaviour going on. So I tried to symbolise that through the pictures as well as document it, if that makes sense. And it's an exploration of the community as a whole. It's not just about the farming community. This guy's a horse whisperer, so he talks to horses who have been abused in some sense and tries to get them to trust people again. And part of that process is training them to stand on the bonnet of a car, which is specially adapted. So these wonderful kind of magical metaphors for these relationships going on in real time in Brittany. Other traditions and kind of reflections of community life are Breton dancing, early morning drinking, of course, which lots of nationalities enjoy. Some of the pictures also reference other things. I constantly have these other references going on in my mind when I'm making a picture. So for me, this kind of references a French New Wave film from the 1960s. This references Flemish painting. I have to say they also have a very strong footballing community there. So they have a very successful football team called En Avant de Guingamp, and who do remarkably well for such a small team. And they have their own football stadium. This is it. So when they have their football matches, about 20,000 people attend. And so I thought the best way to get these images back to the community, in a similar way that I'd done in Port Glasgow, get the images back to the subject matter, was to do the first exhibition of the work at the football stadium. So we made these huge prints about 2 meters wide, about 60 of them, when we put them at the passerelle leading up to the football stadium. So as you can imagine, every other week, this is rammed full of about 20,000 football supporters, most of whom are farmers. It's a strange combination of farming community and football supporters, who would see their images as they walk up to the football match. And just as I finish, I'm going to explain what I did in terms of disseminating the book. So the book itself was made in 2019 in April, and then I got nominated for the Deutsche Börse award in November 2019. I was told I was nominated. So it gave me the opportunity to take the project to the next level. which meant exhibiting it at the Photographer's Gallery as part of the Deutsche Börse Award exhibition. But also I made a new book called Parade Texts, which is interviews with farmers about what their obstacles are in terms of making bio-friendly produce, and what their obstacles were in terms of making ethical farms effectively. So about 80% of the world's produce is made by small farms, which are farms run by family members or friends, 80%. And yet most of the subsidies go to big industrial farming like this, which is, this is free range chicken farming. This is considered free range because the chickens aren't in cages. So you have 100,000 chickens in under one roof in one shed. There's no natural light. There's no air conditioning. You go in there, the noise is horrendous. The smell is horrendous. You inhale it and you can't be there for more than 10 minutes at a time. It's not good for us and it's not good for them, very clearly. So the book was about a call to action to end factory farming. It was also a call to action to give greater subsidies to small farms and access to land for farmers, because land is so expensive now because of real estate prices. So it was sent out together with Parade Texts. To Parade Texts and Parade the Book was sent out to European ministries of food and agriculture in France and the UK and Europe, sent out to schools and libraries as a kind of activist artwork once again. It was sent out in this summer. And I think I'm going to leave it there and start talking to Carey and my other kind guests today. So thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Mark. It's such a pleasure. Can you hear me?
I can, yes, thank you.
Such a pleasure hearing you talk about your work, always so eloquent, and you're humble as well, because you flash through that work and yet it's virtuoso images. So I do encourage everyone to look at Mark's work on his website as well, because there are a number of these images are on his website, so you can luxuriate in their beauty and their incredible detail, which we will get into in a minute. Now, it's a great luxury for me to be here and able to ask Mark, kind of artist to artist questions. And often when artists talk to each other and other people are listening, and especially curators get horrified, because artists like to ask, well, how did you do this? And it's like, curators, you can't ask that. That's not the magic of the work. And it's like, no. This is what artists...
You can, ask away.
Okay, so here's my questions are going to start with the kind of your approach, and also thinking about themes, actually, because there's an incredible variety of themes in your work. When I started listing them, there's class, you're thinking about work, you're thinking about mental health, you're thinking about the economy, social deprivation, there's issues of race, childhood, community, and also ecology. And often these things are a surprise. Like, for example, when I saw Parade, when I went to see it at the Photographer's Gallery, and I thought the work was going to be, my sort of outsider's impression was that it was going to be about Europe. It was a reflection on our European identity, maybe a shared identity post the Brexit vote. Little did I know it was about humans and animals. And our relationship to farming and the future of farming, which is something that comes out very strongly in this publication that you gifted through the show. That's a kind of very strong theme in the work that you want to take forward. So my first question is, when you start a project, how quickly do these themes kind of emerge, and how do they emerge?
Well, the first thing is you've got to really want to do the project. You've got to really want it, because mostly my projects can last 2 or 3 or 4 years. And even now I'm still engaged in various aspects of the realization of those projects, funnily enough, years later, or kind of a continuum of them somehow. So unless you feel really that you've got the juice, the power, the desire, the hunger to say something about something, I would say don't do it, because it takes a lot of energy, as you know, to go through the beginning, the mid stage and the completion, doesn't it? And unless you feel really genuinely passionate about something, just don't do it, because it's not going to work. It's not going to succeed, basically. So I would say that first of all. So sometimes that inspiration comes from a community. So I will come across a community or group of people, or spend time with some people, and I'd be so seduced by them, interested by them, fascinated by some aspect of their life or their struggle or what they have to go through on a daily basis, that it inspires me to make a project. Sometimes it will be a particular aspect around social documentary practice that I'm interested in challenging. Sometimes I'm approached and said, like the Andy Warhol Museum came to me and said, we want you to come and do a project here. And I'd never done a project in America before. I had very strong ideas about what America might be or could be or should be already. And so, of course, I took the opportunity, but they offered me the platform of being there for 6 months. So that's the other thing I ensure, is that I've got time, the luxury of time. So I don't think I'm any better or any worse than a journalist, but I'm different in that I'm always pushing for, the space to make the work that I want to make over a period of time. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And how do you get the ideas for various shots? Because obviously there's a lot of shots. I mean, I think that's a hallmark in your work, actually. You kind of can't, there's like a level of disbelief in many of the shots where you can't, firstly, it's the decisive moment, that kind of the perfect moment where everything comes together, including with the lighting, all kind of aspects, but also the kind of choice of the moment. Like, for example, in your earlier project, Fancy Pictures, which you didn't talk about, which was made on the island of Bute in this kind of feudal farming situation with the aristocratic laird and the kind of feudal farmers, and this wonderful shot of a goat pedicure. And I was wondering, how do you do that? Like, how does it work with the lighting and the technical, all the kind of high-end photography equipment that you're using? How do you know that this is going to be the right shot, the right moment, and just kind of...
Well, most of the best, thank you, Carey, you're right. I mean, it is a result of a kind of long process. So first thing is building up relationships with people. And, I'm not one of these people who thinks, that the personality or the character of the sitter needs to come through, magically morph through your lens onto the film plane. I don't really believe that. What I do believe is that if you go back to the same person again and again and again, they become comfortable with you. Hopefully you become comfortable with them, and you build up a relationship whereby there are opportunities to make candid pictures using professional equipment in a spontaneous way. And also you get to know what looks good in a particular location. So hopefully you visit someone and you connect with them, and you can work out if they're willing or not to spend more time with you on your own vanity project, effectively. And if they get on with you, if they like you, if you're able to give them something in return. I don't just mean, images. I mean, like, companionship, chat. If you really bond with someone, get on okay with them, then they're pleased to see you, So normally the best photographs or the most successful photographs are the result of me going back to the same person or the same location at least 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. And sometimes by the end of it, I'm begging to go back. I'm saying, listen, I'm so close to making a great picture. I know what I want to do. I'll bring you a bottle of wine. I'll bring you that book, whatever it is, and they can see how important it is to me to do it and to get it right. And normally they go, all right then,
So then that's how the goat pedicure happens, is it's held back from you until they've had the wine.
Exactly. Exactly. They know what people like me want, and they withhold the good stuff, until the wine gets, all right, okay, he come through this door here, just over here. This is where it happens. Oh, you know. Like the dog picture, you know, the dog picture I did for Parade there's a girl with pom-poms with amazing blue eyes, and there's 49 dogs on a pontoon going out into a lake behind her. Well, that was a result of about 3 days solid shoots. I made that happen. Obviously, it wasn't just something I stumbled across, and I happened to have large format kit with me when I took the picture. You know, that was something that was obviously orchestrated. And even pictures which look a lot less orchestrated than that one are often orchestrated to a certain extent. Yeah.
And so there's so much here about the patience and the trust given by your subjects, you know, and how long does it take to develop that, especially when you've got big equipment that's going to kind of scare people? They're not used to being photographed, I'm sure.
Well, for me, the key is, one, show no fear, because if you appear confident and relaxed and like nothing bad is ever going to happen to you, then probably nothing bad will. And people around you begin to relax too. And also I work alone mostly, so even if I'm on my own, I'm still, and have to lug a load of heavy camera kit. As you know, lugging camera kit is a nightmare. But if you can do it on your own or just with one other person, it's much better than having a whole crew turn up somewhere, because people don't act naturally when there's more than one or two of you around. And it's intimidating, you know, they want to feel relaxed. And I want to feel relaxed. I don't want to feel like I'm doing something wrong. I'm an intruder or invasive or a pervert or voyeuristic or any of those things. And I really don't want to feel like that. So it's very important for me that people I work with, or take pictures of rather, feel relaxed too, mostly. And it's just a kind of, I go into performance mode when I take pictures quite a lot. So half of it is me making people around me that I'm going to photograph feel relaxed, even if I'm feeling very not relaxed myself. If I'm in a war zone, for example, or I'm surrounded by soldiers, or, you know, obviously I'm not relaxed in that context, but I've got to appear to be very relaxed in order for them to feel relaxed. And then behind that, on top of that, I've got all the time in my mind to be thinking, what is it that I want to make? It's not enough just to get access, is it, Carey? You've got to somehow drive home your own vision and always have that in the back of your mind. You'd be pushing for it in very subtle but deliberate ways, you know. Otherwise, I'm wasting their time and my time, you know. If I'm not getting the pictures I need, I might as well not waste their time at all.
But there's also a thing about art within this, and your role as the artist, that's very important. And I was watching a very interesting talk recently by Latoya Ruby Fraser, who has photographed, she's from Braddock, where you've also photographed, and she was talking about the difficulty as an artist of being kind of shipped in as a visitor to a community to make work, and the kind of resistance she's had, even when she had massive connections with that community. You know, why should they trust her at the beginning? You know, she's just, you know, there she is, she's an artist. They might not like her. In fact, as it happened, they were full of irritation and kind of alienation in relation to the gallery that had never made any attempt to get them to come or, you know, understand their community or anything. So she had a lot of work to do to kind of gain that trust. And I was just wondering what, you know, how you found that experience.
Well, I feel very fortunate. I mean, I always keep it at the forefront of my mind that all the projects happen by the good grace of other people, by the communities I'm working in and living in. So thanks to them, I'm there, you know. So without them, I have nothing, I am nothing. So it's really important, in my opinion, to stay extremely humble. And that's why I go out of my way to make sure, I don't always succeed, but I try to make everyone feel as relaxed as possible about, you know, being involved, as comfortable as possible. It's normally only me, it's not a team of people. I give out my number, my personal number, my email address. I make sure people get copies of the images if they want them. I let people know if it's about to appear on the front cover of the New York Times or anywhere else where they're about to get a nasty shock and see themselves. You know, I get permissions. You know, I've never once been sued. I've never been beaten up. I've never, you know, and I'm sure a big part of that is just me saying, it's me, it's really important to me. It's not doing me any good even. I'm not even making any fucking money out of it. You know, I'm doing it because I want to do it, because I think it's important to do. And if, you know, if we don't do projects about social issues, then we're all going to hell in a handbasket as far as I can see. So I am lucky. You know, I've got a certain platform. I've got, you know, a publisher who wants to make my new book and print it for free, Stidle. So I've got a voice, you know, and so I've got a responsibility, therefore, to use it. So for me, it's very clear. And as long as I'm able to say that to people, I really totally believe in what I'm doing, and I believe it has some real social value, then that's all the armour I need. You know, I can go in anywhere and talk to anyone, and mostly it works out. It's fine.
So I'd love to talk about the fictional aspect in your photographs. And of course, photography for so long has been about ideas of fiction as much as it's been about ideas of trying to speak some idea of a truth at some level, especially within social documentary. But you know, one thing that's so interesting in your work is when you introduce these what look like fiction. I know there were kind of definite fictional strategies in your earlier work. Maybe it's slightly more subtle now. You might disagree, but I'm just wondering how does that happen? Like, when do you feel that's a good moment for that? And how do your subjects feel about that being introduced into the shot, which might be a shot of their real life? Like, do you have to explain it, or how does it work?
Well, yeah, I mean, there are many examples of that where I've you know, especially in Parade, you know, you have a pig sat on the bonnet of a car, and it's a portrait as much of the pig as it is of the farmer. You know, it's a double portrait, and you know, the farmer's wearing a purple jumper, which, you know, a color synchronizes with the purple bonnet of the car and the pink of the pig. So it's obviously been set up. It's a fiction. But if you make a strong photograph, then people suspend disbelief. You know, they want to believe it, even rationally. They know it's not documentary. They want to enter into the world of the picture. So if you make these visual decisions about composition, about color, about kind of refining, keeping the color palette quite limited. If you make these specific decisions, then you allow the viewer to enter more easily into the world of the picture. And so I do make, but social documentary photographers have done this since time immemorial. And even now, people cry outrage for some reason. They're being tricked or fooled or whatever. What's more important to me is the intention, you know, behind the picture sometimes. And I know the intention is good. It's leading you somewhere good, somewhere positive. It's not leading you somewhere deceptive or harmful. So I can talk about the picture of I think the picture of the girl with all the dogs behind her works so well because it's not one thing nor the other. It's not social documentary. It's not reportage. It's not wildlife. It's not trying to sell you anything. It's not quite fashion either. You know, it kind of interweaves all those things. And I think as soon as you start to just touch on different genres, then you can find a way to make a breakthrough image, which at that point, you've kind of engaged the audience, and hopefully they go on to engage with the issues behind the project and think about, the text and the meaning of the work.
I was particularly wanting to get into how your subjects felt about this fictional aspect. Like, is there a point when they go, hang on, what is this? For example, there's a horse standing on is it a Volvo?
Yeah.
With its trainer or owner. I mean, how, at some point is the trainer going, what are you doing here, or is this a joke at my expense, or like how does that, because that's the fictional aspect I was thinking about. Is it a fiction or not? Obviously
no, that one's not a fiction. He really does that. And in fact, when I first saw him, he was doing just exactly that. I was walking over a hill. I'd just come from a fete somewhere in Brittany with all this camera kit. I was tired and fed up, and I was about to go home. And then over this hill, suddenly in this field, I saw this horse with one hoof on the bonnet of a Volvo, and then Jean Roch, the trainer, there next to him. I thought, my God, this is fantastic, you know. So surreal, and it kind of symbolises everything I've been thinking about in terms of these really wonderful relationships between people and animals, you know. And yeah, how we have, you know, we've abused the natural world for so long, haven't we? I mean, and that's why we have a pandemic now, effectively, you know, and still people are not really talking about ending factory farming or putting bans on how we amass animals from different species together. And it's not rocket science, it's very clear. But still, we seem to be desperately worrying about just getting back to normality, whatever that is. And people aren't really talking about how we got into this mess in the first place.
Absolutely, and I think I'm gonna talk about some of the political ideas in your work in a bit. But I wanted also to talk to you about these ideas of community and your relation to the people you photograph. And you've talked about, because your work, photography can be such a kind of lonely practice, and you said the work is about a sense of you needing to belong, and I was wondering if you could talk to us a bit about that.
Well, I may come across as being slightly middle class, I don't know, but middle class, of course, but I'm not. You know, my dad used to run a pub. He was a very complicated guy. My mum was a nurse. And I think we only had one book in the house growing up, and that was Yellow Pages. So, you know, I've worked quite hard to have an education and to make a career. And I've always felt that the work I've made has been really a search for family, which, you know, I didn't have those bonds growing up, really. And it always seemed to me that working class families, from the outside anyway, were more appealing, you know, than colder, sometimes perhaps more middle or upper class families. You know, working class families tended to eat together more, it seemed to me. They tended to hug one another more. There seemed to be more warmth. So, you know, I've made a lot of these very intense, immersive, if you want to call it immersive, projects now. I've made 7 or 8 of them, each one lasting a year or 2 years or whatever. I've got more coming up. And at each turn, I think I've been, retrospectively, when I think about it and look at it, I've been looking for a family, for a sense of belonging. And all the work has been about family and community and what that means to belong to somebody or something. And I never find it, of course, because I'm always going into communities I don't really belong in. And when the project comes to an end, in a way, that's the end of my family. And then I go off looking for another family somewhere else. But, you know, I think you know, class is a big issue in the art world, and I think it needs to be addressed. I think, well, we've talked about this as well, haven't we, Carey? That it's somehow taboo to talk about class. And I often think that, you know, the art world in general adopts causes after the fact. So society will have changed in a certain way, and art will act as if it's the avant-garde, the vanguard of it, somehow leading the thrust, the charge for women's rights in the art world, or Black Lives Matter, or whatever. But in fact, it seems to me they're only appropriating those causes sometimes. It's very important that they do, no matter what the motivation, but it seems to me they never are leading the charge, the art world, in that kind of activist political sense. You have people within it, obviously, who are who are trying to. What do you think?
I do. I definitely agree. We're now going to get into more of a kind of pub chat, aren't we, Mark? Because
I don't know. I think it's a very important pub chat, though.
But the art world can be so kind of superior in its view that it's got a right to talk about things. I think many academic disciplines think all other academic disciplines fold into their own, and that they've all got the right to talk about these things. That's something I've noticed, but we can maybe get back into that later.
That's very true. Yeah.
I did want to ask you about how it works with curators and the institutions that commission you, because that's a big thing for them to take on, isn't it? Like a 2 or 3 year project where you might be in danger, physical danger, or they don't know if it's going to work. There's a lot of money and trust involved. So that's another kind of important there. How does that kind of work?
Well, it's always a unique experience. There's never been 2 experiences the same. The first one, Port Glasgow, was a public art project, and that money came from Scottish Arts Council, which is now called Creative Scotland, and also a European, go figure, a European fund for deprived in the city areas. So they paid 2/3 of it. Of course, that would not exist now. So that was Port Glasgow. I guess Inverclyde Council, the local council, were commissioning me, and we had quite a fraught relationship, partly because it was my first experience doing a big project too, and I didn't have the skill set yet to fully manage that side of it. I found it very comfortable to be amongst people in Port Glasgow, but not so comfortable to be sat around the table with the people commissioning me. After that, I got invited to do a project on the Isle of Bute for the Bute family. So Sophie Crichton-Stewart, who's the curator there, was fantastic to work with, actually. So they sorted out accommodation for me for a year on and off on the Isle of Bute. Again, they had funding, I think, from Creative Scotland to make that happen for an extensive period of time. The Andy Warhol Museum funded my 6 months there, and that was a series of grants that we put in over a period of 6 months. The Imperial War Museum, basically, that was extremely difficult. So they promised to show my work when I came back, and they didn't. So it wasn't, I came back in 2011 with PTSD, and they didn't show the work till British troops pulled out of Helmand, Afghanistan, which was 2014, go figure. So that was very difficult to sit on that work for 3 years, and it really aggravated exponentially my sense of trauma, and it's something that a lot of journalists and artists feel when they go to a war zone. They come back with their vision of truth, and it's edited either by the gallery or BBC or by a newspaper, by an editor, because it doesn't fit in with that particular editor's vision of what the agenda is for the newspaper. And so the sense of discontinuity between the war zone and civilian life is further extenuated simply because of that sense of that censorship. So of course, that really aggravated things. And clearly they weren't happy with what I'd produced. For whatever reason. With Gwynsigal and Centre of Art and Parade, it was I had amazing support from them. So they're not a big art centre. It's a small art centre in the middle of Brittany, extremely dedicated staff. Jerome Southern, director there, it's amazing. And I did a whole solid month there. And after a month, I said to him, I don't want to do this anymore. I can't. No one's allowing me access. It rains all the time here. I just don't feel a connection. And he really sat down with me and tried to work out how to make the project work. And then we kept it going. And every time he needed to raise money to pay for my flights or my film stock or a small fee for me, he would go and find it and would arrange for me to come back for a couple of weeks and do some more. And I was shooting a lot of film stock. I'm not into shooting 1 or 2 rolls a day. I shoot 10 rolls a day. And then we'd have to pay for that to be processed, and then we'd look at all the negatives and then plan the next trip and plan all the appointments. So it was very intense, and he kept this going for 4 or 5 years. So I'm really very impressed with that, and that's very rare and difficult to find. So it's, part of the struggle is finding people who are willing to give you that space to realise that trust as well, to realise something special. And of course, the more projects I've done like this, the more trust perhaps people feel that they can put in me to deliver. They'll know they'll get something, you know, they know they'll get some kind of output which is significant, and that they know that if I say yes, that I'll invest everything personally into making it happen. So I think that's part of how it works now, is that people, they decide more or less they're going to take the risk, and that's it, and then they dive in as well with me, you know.
And I did want to ask you now to turn to think about children and young people in your work, because it's quite noticeable actually, and a wonderful theme really, if I could call it a theme, or a kind of priority maybe in the work, to look at children, look at young people. And you know, when I think about my students now and this young generation that are coming up, and they're so political, and that's so exciting, you know, they're very exciting to teach. And it's so important that they are political, given our moments. But I was just wondering how children and young people respond to being in your work. Like, is that it must be very different to adults when you ask adults, like, well, what's the process of working with children for you, or young people?
Well, the first thing is I take a lot of pictures of people from all age groups, but I do, you're right, particularly respond. For some reason, I've done this throughout the projects, even if the projects haven't ostensibly been about youth or young people or childhood. I've ended up within that bit about displaced people in Ukraine or you know, wealth inequality in London. I've ended up taking pictures of kids, often in quite extreme circumstances. You know, they might have just survived a shelling or bombing in Ukraine, or you know, or been victims of, you know, severe poverty in North London. You know, whatever it is, you know, these are kids normally not having a great time. You know, and someone explained it to me. They said, you know, because no one shone a light on what was happening to you when you were a kid, you're trying to shine a light on, you know, injustices that kids are having now. So I don't know if that's true or not, but that seemed to me to be one insight into why I do it. There must be a reason. It's not for nothing that that's happening. I do feel very strongly, I don't have kids myself, but I do feel very strongly about children's rights to play. You know, I did a whole project about the halting of adventure playgrounds being closed down in London and inner city areas. So the borough I used to live in Islington, 40% of children in Islington, one of the wealthiest boroughs in the world, in Britain, live in poverty, 40%. You know, and these adventure playgrounds are so important to them. You can see it, that after school they'll run to the adventure playgrounds, and they're letting off steam, and they're so important as well because of bonding. It's how you test boundaries, how you make friendships, all those things that make, you know, make you into a successful adult, which are non-academic actually, aren't they? They're about, you know, finding out who you are, testing your boundaries, and those things happen during childhood. So it's so important. And there's been a massive rise in kids and young people self-harming over the past 4 or 5 years, and it's going to go up and up and up, isn't it? Because of COVID and the economic crisis that's going to further engulf Britain. And so mental health mental health in general is extremely important to me, and it's manifesting and created through the damage we do to young people effectively. When
I think about the timeline of your work, you've often been kind of early to make these comments actually. For example, your work on mental health was much earlier than the public figures that have now started to talk about it in the media. I mean, obviously this is a very important conversation to become more and more public, but you know, it's quite notable to me that your work, you know, is it 2013, the Helmand work, you know, that it raised that issue and clearly struck a massive chord.
Yeah, I mean, when I take a picture of a young person, it feels like a self-portrait, to be honest. You know, I'm looking for something in myself and them, I guess, something lost somewhere. But I think mental health is, yeah, it's so important, isn't it? And I think, I mean, it's a difficult one as well, because I do not suffer from PTSD now, but whenever I have to talk about the Helmand work particularly, it's the one project I still get really upset about. You know, I can engage with it during the talk, I can do an exhibition about it, or I sometimes get asked to do talks to the NHS or veterans associations about PTSD and what happened in Helmand and everything, the project. But I can only engage with it for so long before it becomes totally upsetting and overwhelming. And for my own good, I have to step away from it for a while, because I really campaigned so hard through that project to support veterans in Britain and the lack of support, and have some kind of clear, lucid encouragement pathway for veterans to get help, mental health support. And on each occasion, it's fallen flat, you know. It fell flat in 2015, it fell flat again when I did an exhibition at Quad in Derby, a big solo show, Battle Against Stigma, featuring that work and the work about displaced Ukrainians. Again, it was accompanied by a massive publicity campaign, interviews, workshops with veterans. Nothing changed. Government policy didn't change. The book was talked about in the Houses of Parliament. Battle Against Stigma was talked about by one of the MPs. Nothing changed. You know, that's what's tough. It's not talking about these issues. It's the fact that nothing fucking changes, you know. But does that mean we shouldn't do it? I don't think it does, you know, because things do change. But it's a matter of chipping away at them, you know. And this is a question that I ask myself a lot is, surely, Mark, it would have been better if you'd got a job as a hedge fund manager 20 years ago and done that instead, and then just use that money to invest in things that you believe in. You know, but then I wouldn't have had the same experiences I've had, you know, on a personal level. I'd have had other experiences, probably very interesting as well, but I wouldn't have had this particular set of experiences, which I'm grateful for, actually. But in terms of changing things, it's can be very disheartening, can't it?
I did, and I'm gonna get to the audience questions in a minute. I guess this should be my last one, but then I'm going to start seeing if the audience questions are as good as my questions that I've already got. But this question of change is very important in your work, and I do love this project that you made called Deeds Not Words, where you started to try and affect government policy. And now when I think about your work with war, in Helmand, and now you're bringing it to Ukraine. So I guess I wanted to, you know, particularly focus on that, because, you know, you say you're trying to end the war in Ukraine, and that is, you know, who wouldn't raise an eyebrow, you know, an artist saying that. So that's a grand ambition there, Mark. I mean, how can arts do that? Or is it about raising media? Is it a media debate that you want to, because obviously a media debate can be very powerful in all this through images.
Yeah, I think I'm fooling myself that it can or will make it will make no difference whatsoever. It will make no difference whatsoever, most probably. But there's a small chance it could have some beneficial impact. And I have a responsibility. I've got a platform to do something, not a lot, to do something. And if I don't believe it's going to make an impact, who else is going to believe it? And actually, I've worked bloody hard on that for 4 or 5 years. I've been shot at in Ukraine. I've put up a lot of my own money into that project. I put the money of other people and other institutions into that book. Stydel, the best art book publisher in the world, arguably, is going to spend a lot of money printing that book. You know, a lot of people are invested in, and all the displaced people who talk to me who you know, posed for me, who took time with me. You know, they're invested in it. People are dying every day there. And the title of the book, Stop Tanks with Books, came from a conversation I had with someone who said, you can't stop tanks with books. So, yeah. I can't not do it. I have to make it, and I have to believe it's going to have some positive impact. I have to believe it.
Well, absolutely. And I think, you know, for academics also, it's very interesting because, you know, there's always this question of impact now for art. I mean, it's a sort of horrible word, but also the idea that you would want to influence policy, you know, is anathema to many academics, but is very valuable within an academic context in terms of the funding. And here's you're really trying to do that. I mean, really trying to do that, including, you know, staging conferences around these events and all that. So who's to say that art can't achieve these political objectives?
Well, it should, shouldn't it? It deals, especially people working in the documentary genre, you know, we're dealing with reality, real things, you know, we obviously reinvent them and twist them according to our own agenda, even if we don't want to. We're doing that all the time when we're interpreting reality. It's our own vision, it always is. But, you know, if we're working in genre, we have to be more inventive than just thinking if we write a piece in the New York Times, it's going to change the world. Or if we do an art exhibition in a white cube, it's going to change the world. It's not. It's our responsibility to use that vision to find new ways of impacting the world, isn't it? I think.
It is. So I'm gonna ask you some questions now from the audience, having made everyone wait very patiently for ages. So the first one, I'm going to fold two questions from the same person into one, actually. So your photos look both highly posed and catch people's personalities so well. Normally, the more posed, the less honest a photograph this person feels. So how do you do it? And do you ever take photographs of people who don't know that you're there?
What I try to do if I take a picture is I either go up to someone beforehand, if it's on the street, and say, oh my God, you look amazing. This is going to be such a wonderful picture. Please, can I take your photograph? I'll make sure you get a copy. It's not going to be reproduced anywhere. Here's my number and email. You know, I know what I'm doing. Or if I really see something happening before me, which I think is important and I need to capture it immediately, I will take the picture, and then afterwards I will go up to the person and say, listen, I'm sorry I couldn't resist. I had to take the picture. It looks amazing. I promise I will not reproduce it anywhere without your full permission. Here's my contact details. So that's what I do in terms of on day to day, if I'm on the streets in Brittany taking pictures, say, for example. In terms of other encounters with people, there's quite a lot of direction going on sometimes. You know, if I'm working in a nightclub, obviously, then there isn't. You know, part of the beauty of it is it's not orchestrated. So then it's up to me to orchestrate the environment as much as possible. So I will talk to the bar owner or the club owner. I'll try and install flashlights in the rigging, or go with one or two assistants with lights, flashes on a stick, you know, and I'll be saying, right, move left, move right, you know, and I'm thinking, right, if that person just moves left or right a bit, it's going to be like amazing. I'm going to get a Pulitzer. I'm stood on a chair in a busy nightclub. It's 2 a.m. I'm tired. The camera's heavy. And I'm like thinking, just please move a bit. And 20 minutes and they're not moving, and I give up. And the minute I move my camera away, they do exactly what I wanted them to do, or not, you know. So that's that kind of situation. But then I'm orchestrating the lighting quite specifically. And then other times, as I explained in Parade, you know, I'm telling the farmer, have you got a purple jumper you can wear for this shoot in your wardrobe? Or I'm saying, can we move this over here somewhere because I like that background? Or, you know, can we be doing something as opposed to you just sat there like, you know, like a kind of colour supplement, conventional portrait? And all these decisions are made during the process of making an image. Like, you know, do you photograph from the knees up or from the chest up, you know? Do you want the hands in? You know, they're all important decisions when you take a portrait, and there's so many ways in which it can fail flat, and it's only if you get all the elements together. I mean, I think throughout my career making photographs, I think I've only made probably 6 or 7 really phenomenal pictures. It's very, very difficult to make a picture where you go back to it again and again and it still gives you something even a year, 10 years, 5 years later. And it's very difficult to do, you know. And that's why it's exciting to work with photography. It's so difficult. Don't you think?
I do agree, definitely. Just wait till you try video. No, you do shoot video. I think video's hard, but I don't work the way you work.
That's interesting. I find it
dimension. So there's another question here. Would you consider exploring the refugee crisis and the lives of these people, especially now with the ending of free movement?
Well, I have done. I mean, I did a whole project in Ukraine, displaced Ukrainians. 2 million people fled their homes either to within Ukraine, internally displaced, or to Russia, for example, ironically enough. So I have, you know, and I like to take on projects because I feel a direct connection to them and I really need and have to do them, rather than them being particularly newsworthy, if that makes sense. It doesn't mean that I've got anything against doing a project specifically about refugees. I would love to, but I'd have to feel and find, you know, the right project, the right reason, the right connection to it as a subject. But you're right, it's incredibly important. And I'd have to feel I was making a contribution to that subject, a really important contribution, because I think a lot of artists are making work about it. So I don't, you know, unless I feel that I can make a really solid contribution, then I'd rather not.
Okay, there's another question from the audience. So if funding and censorship were no object and you could explore any subject you wanted, what would it be?
Wow, what a question. Geez, oh. If funding wasn't a problem.
Or censorship.
Or censorship. Would there be anything worth making work about then? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I still think class is really important. You know, I still think class in Britain needs to be sorted out. And so the more people who start making work about that and seeing that as a real obstacle to happiness, I think the better. So I would love to make a major project which really knocked holes in the class system in Britain. Yeah, that would be good, and that would be conventionally actually a subject which would get heavily censored. I'm sure there'd be ways for it. Sounds very conspiracy theory of me, but there'd be ways in which the establishment of the art world would not feel totally comfortable with all aspects of that project. I mean, there's an artist called Hans Harker, who Carey knows very well, who made a piece. He invented a concept, really, a way of working called institutional critique, in which he basically criticised the board members of one of the major American museums and outed their investments in dodgy real estate deals in an exhibition he made. Is that right? Something along those lines, isn't it, Carey? But a wonderful way in which he kind of made a kind of wealth and class critique of many people he was working with in the art world. But again, it's complicated, very complicated and brave thing to do, I think.
Okay, well, there's no more audience questions. I might just jump in with one last question, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure.
I think there's something else to ask you about your activist intentions in the work and the kind of work as kind of acts of activism, really. And this question, you know, I guess Tanya Bruguera, the artist, called activist art utile, you know, useful art. But I'm just wondering, you know, how do you measure the effect And over what time frame? Because people always, I think, come to art thinking it needs to have an immediate effect, whereas actually maybe we should be thinking about this over a much longer time frame. So I was just wondering, like, how you track the response, like the group impact or the wider impact.
Well, it's really troubling me at the moment, actually, this idea of impact. I believe my projects do have impact, but they're very difficult to gauge. And that's tough because I don't know where and how and in which ways I'm failing and in which ways I'm succeeding. I think as I said, the most impactful project I made in terms of being able to gauge that response and assess it was Battle Against Stigma, because all these veterans of their own accord wrote to me directly. And so I now have this wonderful archive, wonderful and dreadful at the same time, this archive of what it means to be involved in modern warfare, and all those letters have gone to King's College, to their archive, and they've made a real valuable contribution in that way. And I've been able to see that project has had real effect. And it's had effect because, as I said, people saw a version of themselves in me. So it's the one project I've done which hasn't been about other people. It's been directly, biographically, intrinsically about myself. And I'm more and more tempted to do work which has some kind of direct biographical content, actually, because people respond to it. It's not about narcissism, it's about communicating universal things, isn't it? And so I'm more and more tempted to use myself as a kind of petri dish, if you like, for the projects, or a kind of, a starting board, but of course it's not, I don't want to talk about every aspect of my life with people, nobody does really, do they? So I don't know how that will play out in the future. I do feel that Battle Against Stigma was the most, had the most impact. And I do want to find a new way of working. It might not be I've done this, employed the strategy of a targeted book dissemination 6 or 7 times now. So I don't want to do it indefinitely. I've kind of explored that framework. And now's the time, really, I think, to use a different framework, a different model, which maybe a different model would involve an easier form of assessment, being able to understand how it's impacting on people's lives, if at all. I don't know, but it's it's definitely important to try and understand how it is and if it is, I think.
Fantastic. Well, I feel like we should, we're up to 8:30 now, which was our kind of idea of an event timing, and it's a very nice place to leave because it gives us a sense of the future and also of the kind of political effect of your work, which is so important and so innovative, really, in my opinion, in terms of photography and in terms of art making. So let's leave it as this kind of sense of the work in the world where it should be. And
thank you, Carey.
So thank you very much, Mark. It was fantastic as ever to hear you, and the work is brilliant, of course. And everyone that's in Oxford, you have the chance to go and see it at Wolfson when the COVID period is over and college will be open again. So this is a great thing for Oxford.
Thank you to Wolfson College for having us. It's great to talk to you, Carey. Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thanks for coming, everyone. Thanks again.